Welcome everybody to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute Getting to the Point very special program this afternoon. We are delighted to have with us Congresswoman Katherine Clark from the 5th District of Massachusetts. It is a very, very special program indeed. Congresswoman Clark was first elected in a special election in December of 2013, and in a very short period of time, she has been on a just rocket ship trajectory of leadership in the Congress. In the fall of 2018, she was elected by her colleagues to serve as vice chair of the Democratic Caucus, making her the 6th highest ranking Democrat in the Congress. She serves as a member of the Steering and Policy Committee in her caucus, but it is really her commitment in public service that has just distinguished her. She is committed to helping children and families succeed. She believes that Congress has to work to end the disconnect between the needs of families at home and the priorities in Washington. And just today, she published a piece in The Hill where, along with Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Suzanne Clark, the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, about the essential need for childcare, for us to be able to return to work, and for our nation to be able to recover from this COVID crisis. I commend it to all of you to read. It was a terrific piece in The Hill today. In Congress, she brings her experience, her vast experience to bear in everything she does. She was a state senator, a state rep, but she was general counsel for the Massachusetts Office of Child Care Services, which you see in everything that she does. She was policy chief for a state attorney general here, and she's also a mother. Katherine is a member of the House Committee on Appropriations, 3 subcommittees within appropriations, Labor, Health, and Human Services, Education and Related Agencies, Legislative Branch, and Transportation, and Housing and Urban Development and Related Agencies. She's also a proud member of several caucuses in the Congress, including the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Women's Caucus, and we are so delighted to have the Congresswoman here with us today. Also joining her for today's discussion is Kimberly Atkins, senior opinion writer at the Boston Globe. She's also an MSNBC contributor, providing on-air analysis and commentary of the national political news of the day. Previously, Kim was the first Washington, D.C.-based news correspondent for WBUR, and she's worked for the Boston Herald, Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly, and the Dolan Company newspapers. Kim is a well-respected voice and has appeared as a political commentator on a host of national and international television and radio networks. We are so delighted to have you here, Kim. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and so that you can interview the Congresswoman. We are delighted, looking forward to this very special Getting to the Point program today. Thank you both.
And thank you so much for having me for this very important conversation at a very important time with Congresswoman Clark. Good afternoon to you.
Oh, thank you, Kim. It is delightful to be here. And thank you, Vicki, for that incredible introduction. And to everyone at the Kennedy Institute, it is a place near and dear to my heart, and very honored to be here with you today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And so am I, and so is our audience, and I have probably more questions than I can ask in an hour, so I'm just going to get right to it. But as Vicki mentioned, you are the Democratic Caucus Vice Chair. Just sort of start us out by explaining a little bit what that means, what your role is there, and how it is playing out right now.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. The vice chair role is we are in charge with the chairman, Hakeem Jeffries, of running our caucus meetings, and especially during this pandemic. It is about making sure that we are communicating, that people understand our agenda, that we are working across the caucus to support people and to bring our incredible caucus. It is historically the most diverse caucus that has ever been elected to Congress. And we celebrate that diversity. And we, as vice chair, my role is really, I take the lessons I learned from 2018 when I served as co-chair of the Red to Blue program and the recruitment program, getting to know districts around the country that look very different from mine, but are united around shared values. And my reason I ran for leadership is because I believe in women in leadership at all levels. And I think we tend to prioritize those issues that are so critical to women's economic success. And that is good for the entire economy and the entire country and Congress. But I see my role as really one of convening and keeping talking to the caucus and making sure that we are working on an agenda that puts Americans first. And during this pandemic, it has been a challenge that everybody has faced in their lives on how we continue to do that virtually. And the caucus has even become more important as that call that we have broad participation on to make sure that we are staying in touch and incorporating all the voices of our caucus to get it right and make sure we are developing the solutions that Americans need.
And you anticipated my next question, which is during this pandemic, which is the top issue facing Americans right now. Talk about how that has changed the way that you and your colleagues on Capitol Hill legislate and what you're legislating, particularly the next round of relief, if there will be a next round of relief for the epidemic.
Well, you know, there was absolutely no way we could pull back during this time. And so we have continued to go to Congress. We have set up special rules so that members who have pre-existing conditions or have been ill with the COVID-19 virus can vote safely from home. But our work has continued. We've had over 50 caucus conference calls since March, and sometimes we have multiple calls during a week. But we know that the American people are depending on the federal government and Congress for the help that they need, and that they cannot do it alone. And state and local governments can't do it alone. That's why we passed bills in March. We passed the CARES Act. We came back and did a supplemental in April. And the Democrats in the House passed the HEROES Act over 100 days ago, back in May, to make sure that we are still investing in testing in our hospitals and healthcare infrastructure, specifically identified money to get schools to be reopened safely, meet the food insecurity needs. I hear it every single day in my communities that kids and families are going to bed hungry here in Massachusetts and around the country, and it's on the rise. I've heard from constituents who've said, I used to be the one who volunteered at the food pantry. Now I need to go and be a client. And it's issues like that and eviction relief, getting the unemployment benefits people need. All of these issues are driven by meeting this challenge, making sure we're following the science, and frankly, filling the void from this White House. This president and his administration have not set out a national agenda for addressing this pandemic. And lives and livelihoods are in the balance. And so we are going to continue our push to get that HEROES Act passed and get relief to the American people as quickly as possible.
How confident are you that the Democrats in the House will come to a compromise with the Republicans in the Senate and the White House?
I am very confident in the Democrats compromising to be able to get relief. The problem is, to be frank about it, there's nobody coming to the negotiating table with us. You don't get more of a compromise than saying, I'll meet you halfway. And that offer has been met with silence. And it is, I shouldn't be surprised because it's so routine at this point, but the administration and many of my counterparts across the aisle in the Senate and in the House just have an extreme high tolerance for other people's pain. And they are continuing not to see the challenges that Americans are facing, where we have 1 out of every 10 Americans have lost their job. And this particular impact has really hit women and women of color exceedingly hard. You know, we have had one economist come before us and call it a she-cession. We've lost 12 million jobs that women held just in the months of March and April. And only a third of those have come back. And we know that women make up a quarter of all essential workers, that they tend to work in hospitality industry, the travel industry that has been hit so hard. And so we're going to continue to fight for the American people and try and get the Republicans and this administration back to the negotiation table. But we can't just negotiate with ourselves. We need them to be willing and active partners in this.
And I want to get to that and more issues that you're facing, including racial justice and other things. But on the issue of relief, a $3 trillion package, which is what is proposed by Democrats. At the same time, the U.S. debt will exceed the gross domestic product for the first time since 1946, and that was due to spending on World War II. Are you concerned that the spending, even in a response to the pandemic, might be ballooning the national debt?
You know, there is no doubt that we have seen the deficit go up from the beginning of the Trump administration. This is not a new problem, but the size of it is also reflective of the response that we need. But now is the time to make these investments. They are crucial. We cannot approach a challenge like World War II and like this pandemic and say we're going to do it by cutting programs. We're going to do it by letting millions of people be evicted. We're going to do it by letting our children go hungry. We're going to do it by, you know, counting out so many jobs and small businesses and saying that's the way it goes. That is what the president said about the 180,000, the 1,000 American lives we lose every day. He said, it is what it is. And that's not good enough. And so our priority are making these crucial investments that are going to secure the health of the American people so that we can secure the health of this economy and get us back to where we need to be. And I hope that that won't even be a return to the status quo, but that we're going to push for a more inclusive economy, that we're going to push for greater opportunity for everyone. This pandemic has shown the inequities that we knew existed before, but it has brought them into stark relief. You know, as we look at our immigrant communities, low-income communities, communities of color, and the disparate effect of this pandemic on those communities and their health outcomes. If we look at who are losing jobs, it's all part of this package and frankly, part of this time of racial justice and a push for a reckoning in this country with our very troubled history that has become institutionalized in our country. So it is not the time for us to pull back. It is the time for us to make these key investments. And then we have to relook at tax policy. When times were better, we saw the Republicans in the House and the Senate and signed by the president rush to help wealthier Americans become even wealthier and large corporations do even better. But it comes at a price, and we know who's paying the price, and that's hardworking American families.
And on the issue of hardworking American families, one issue that you have devoted a lot of time to is child care. It's obviously access to affordable childcare has been highlighted during this pandemic that has affected so many people and closed so many schools. Talk about the legislation that you put forward and how you see this as an infrastructure issue.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. And I think, you know, childcare operated on the thinnest of margins in the best of times, and it has been chronically underinvested in. You know, I've been fighting for childcare funding since I came to Congress and was able to, you know, just last year, secure $2 billion increase, which was good and progress, but not nearly what we needed. And again, this pandemic has revealed where we are. We have 370,000 jobs lost since February across the country for childcare providers. We are looking at 40% of providers here in Massachusetts not sure they will ever reopen. We were already looking at a female-dominated industry, and also 40% of those women are women of color, but they are chronically underpaid, while at the same time, we have very high costs for families. So it is long past time that we, you know, stop looking at childcare as some sort of private decision between moms and dads and a childcare provider, and as part of our public infrastructure, as critical to our economy as roads and bridges, because it is about not only supporting our children so that every child gets to kindergarten ready to learn, can hit that key metric of reading at grade level by third grade. It also supports working families. And it is why, you know, as Vicki referenced, we're finding chambers of commerce, including the National Chamber of Commerce, bringing us together to support bills like the House put out, which called for $50 billion in stabilizing childcare. We are not going to be able to get our economy working again. We are not going to get our schools safely reopened if we do not address this issue. And we're going to continue to pass bills like we have that will give childcare providers opportunities to have infrastructure grants so they can put up a wall. They can build a vestibule so they can check children before they come into their home. They can have PPE and sanitation equipment. And we have to recognize that these are professionals who are part of our education system, and we need to compensate them as such. So there's much work to do, but I'm proud of what the House has accomplished, and we are going to continue to push that the Senate take this up. If we're serious about addressing getting our economy working again, we wouldn't let a bridge go down in the middle of our town that cut off all our businesses and say, well, we're going to wait till a better time. We would make that investment, and that's where we are with childcare.
Now, another area of legislation that has passed the House but has stalled in the Senate is the issue of racial justice, dealing with that, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that was passed but is now, it's essentially a non-starter in the Senate. Meanwhile, we continue in this moment where calls for racial justice are increasing. We're seeing other troubling signs, such as the rise of armed militia groups who are showing up at protests. We're seeing increasing amount of violence there as a result of those clashes. And we have a president who compared bad police officers to a 3-foot putt in a golf tournament. With all of that stagnation, folks who are looking to Congress to say, we want something done, what do you say to them? What do you say as vice chair of the Democratic Caucus about how Washington will respond to this very urgent issue?
Well, I'm very proud that the House did pass the George Floyd Policing Reform Act back in June, that we moved with the urgency that is needed. This is not a new issue. It is not a new issue to communities of color. It is not a new issue to the Democrats in the House. We have had members like Hank Johnson working on demilitarization of the police for years. We have had leaders like Bobby Rush working on anti-lynching, and all the type of legislation that can make sure that our laws apply to everybody equally. And one of my goals as a mom of 3 sons is that every mom is able to send their children out for a jog, or they go to the movies, they drive the car to the grocery store, and they have the same experience that I have. I worry about my children on a host of issues, but I never once have had to worry that because of the color of their skin, they will be killed, treated unfairly, assaulted, or arrested. And that has to be security for everybody. And this cannot continue to be just for some of us. And we have a president who every day is giving a message of fear, division, a call to violence. And so we are going to have to look to one another. This pandemic has highlighted so many things, and one of them is if we're not all healthy, if we're not all being cautious and taking precautions and following the science, our communities aren't healthy. And liberty, freedom, justice isn't some pie that gets smaller when you share it. It grows, and none of us are truly going to have that opportunity as long as we have police brutality, we have communities of color who do not see that they are protected and treated equally under law. As long as we are not addressing mass incarceration in this country, all of these issues play into how we not just strive for our ideals in America, but how we make them a reality. And, you know, the toxic roots of slavery are very much apparent in our institutions, in our culture. But this is a moment where we can also see that we are having demonstrations across this country, peaceful protests from very diverse communities, saying that we understand that this is something that when we work for it, all of us will be more secure. All of us will have more opportunity. So the House has passed these bills. We have continued to work on them. And, you know, we have to keep the pressure on the Senate and this president to say we are not going to be divided by fear. We are not going to let you take a playbook from 1968 and try and make us fear one another. We understand that we all are going to do better in this fight for equality and making sure that everybody has laws applied to them in the same way.
I'm weaving in questions that we have received and are receiving from members of our audience along the way as we go. And we've gotten several questions in the vein of asking you about what it's like working now and how have things changed in terms of the partisan divide on Capitol Hill? Is the rhetoric making it more difficult for you to do your job? We're talking about all the bills that are passed by the Democratic controlled House, but that stall immediately in the Republican controlled Senate. One audience member says, is it possible to get back to the days where we saw Senators Kennedy and Hatch come together and work across the aisle? So that real solution making can that happen again?
Yeah, you know, Kim, when I ran for Congress, I came in a special election, as Vicki said, and so I was the, least senior person, most junior member of the minority party. And yet my constituents and people sent me to Washington were counting on me. And so I had to work across the aisle. And I found that I could work with so many House members who were as ravaged by the opiate crisis as we were here in Massachusetts. And that with so many of these issues, they play out the same way, whether you're in a red state or a blue state. And so we have to continue to do that work. But President Trump has changed much of this because he doesn't respect the law. He doesn't think it applies to him. He just spreads lies and misinformation, and the complicity and the acceptance of that by many, the majority of the members of the Republican Party in the House and the Senate, make it very difficult to come together and work. We will continue to try because I do believe that Congress is set up, that we bring our experiences, our perspectives from across the country. And that's the way when we come together and negotiate and compromise, we come out with a better product. But right now it is broken. And we have a president who isn't interested in fulfilling what he said on his election night, that he would be a president for all Americans. He is a president for himself and for his very narrow interests. And frankly, he isn't interested in what's happening with the pandemic. He is looking at this hunger for racial justice in this country, this hunger that people have to finally get it right and to finally address systemic racism and to look at it and not just be, not a racist, but to be an active, as Dr. Kendi says, an active anti-racist. And he just sees this totally differently and has set a tone that it is about fear, it is about division, and it is about getting reelected at all costs. So we're going to continue to come up with solutions the American people need, meet the challenge of this moment, and set a course of optimism that we can do this, that this is a country that knows that if it actually meets those ideals, we're all going to do better. So it is absolutely challenging. It has absolutely become more partisan with a president who seems to be the only lever he knows how to use. And as the GOP has become more the party of Trump and abandoned many of their issues, which I may have agreed or disagreed about, but they were policy-based, not about framing a country as one that is permanently divided and permanently divided into the have and have-nots. And this president and those who are complicit with him seem to want to make that winner's circle very, very small to those who already have made great wealth and already have great privilege and advantages.
A couple more questions on the legislative side, and then I want to shift the discussion to talk about the elections. But on the legislative side, are there specific, from the audience, are there specific sticking points between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to the next round of pandemic relief?
Yes and no. So one of the major sticking points is relief for state and local governments. And we believe that we need to be able to shore up these budgets as we move forward. We know that whether you are concerned about how we're going to have schools reopen, how are we going to keep teachers safe, how are we going to keep teachers' jobs, how are we going to keep our firefighters and first responders, how are we going to have our local public health departments funded with testing available? How are we going to get some of the new innovations that are coming, these rapid tests, distributed so that our small businesses can reopen? All of this cannot be done without the federal government's help. But when we passed the HEROES Act, Mitch McConnell was very clear. He said to the American people, let those states go bankrupt. And, so we are going to continue to try and find compromise, to try and see what we can do now. And, maybe we reduce the length of some of these benefits so that we can get through this election, get through this budget cycle and the end of the year, and then we'll see where we are. And I certainly hope we will have a new president in Joe Biden, and a new vice president in Kamala Harris, and a majority in the Senate, as well as keeping ours in the House. But you have to come to the table. And if we are met with this callous indifference and empty chairs at the negotiating table, it's going to get increasingly difficult. But we're going to do everything we can to try and get there.
Okay, and another question is, what legislation can Americans expect coming out of Congress, passing Congress by the end of the year? I will add, if any. Can we expect any legislation to come out of Congress before the end of this session?
Well, the one guarantee that we know the Senate will take up is the federal budget and the appropriations bills that the House has completed. As most of your people on this, I'm sure, are aware, our budget is October 1st. So we are coming right up on it, and that is a must-pass piece of legislation. So I think over the next few weeks, we are going to see the intersection of that bill and how we get relief to our local communities, to our hospitals, how we invest in testing, childcare, food, rent stabilization, all of the pieces that we need, unemployment benefits, to meet the challenges that families and communities are facing, and see if we can't get them to the negotiating table, what we can do with those appropriation bills. But they have to be passed, and they may very well turn into the vehicle for relief.
Okay, I want to shift the focus now to the upcoming election. It's exactly 2 months from today, and we've had several members of our audience ask a version of the question, which is, as those elections approach, what can the House do to protect the security and integrity of elections and prevent the sort of foreign interference that we saw 4 years ago?
Yeah. So, the House has passed 3 bills, starting with the very first one we passed when we first came into Congress in January of 19 to protect elections. And we are continuing to push for funding to help states with their mail-in programs during the pandemic. Again, these bills have been met with absolute indifference and are gathering dust on Mitch McConnell's desk. But we can't just say, wow, we've done all we can. So we are continuing to work to organize grassroots, to make sure that we are working with nonprofits and other groups to get people registered, to get them to understand the mail programs, how that works, that they can vote safely from home. We're going to be having voter protection programs so that we don't see some of the irregularities that we saw play out in Wisconsin and Georgia during their primaries. And we are trying to educate every single voter to make a plan for how you're going to vote. Are you going to vote by mail? Get it in early. Are you going to go in person? What's your childcare plan? What's your work plan? As Michelle Obama said, bring a snack, be prepared. We know what's on the line in November, and it really is the very fundamentals of our democracy. Who are we going to emerge out of this election as a country? And we also know that this president will cheat, that he will invite foreign interference, that he already has done that. And so we are also going to be vigilant in calling them out, making sure that the American people understand and know the intelligence that is coming in. And I'm not talking about revealing classified, but there are plenty of things we can share publicly with the American people, and they should know. They have to be able to evaluate the information that is coming to them through social media, through their friends and neighbors, and know what's true and what is not. So the challenge is great, but the good news is I have never seen such energy I didn't know if we could really top what I saw in 2018, where we saw people from around the country who had never been involved in politics, never mind voted for a Democrat, come together and say, we want a different vision for ourselves, for our community, for our children and our grandchildren. And we are seeing that again. We are seeing people who are just saying, this is not the country that I recognize through the lens of Donald Trump. You know, his vision for us as divided, as you know, that only those who already have great wealth get to be wealthy and have opportunities. And so we're seeing energy. I think it was on display this week in Massachusetts with the number of primary voters and people who are active, not only working for campaigns here, but reaching out across the country and sending those text messages, getting on the phones, you know, calling friends and neighbors in other states. And that energy, I think, is how we're going to be able to combat what we know is going to be some very frightening antics going into the election.
Now, you are a member of the platform committee of the Democratic National Committee. Talk about that role and what the platform of the party reveals about the issues and values you're focused on leading into November.
Yeah, so I was part of the drafting committee of the platform, and I was very proud to be a part of an incredibly diverse group of people coming from many different perspectives who spent hours and hours going over our platform and not just sort of reorganizing our one from 2016, but really meeting this moment. And it is a very progressive platform, the most progressive that we've had. And it meets the challenge that we are facing today in this country. I think one of the most extraordinary things is that the Republican Party decided not to have one this year. They just decided we're not interested in policy. We're not interested in talking about issues, because our plan is to get Joe Biden in the White House, to win the Senate, keep and expand our majority in the House. But it's not just to be undo what Donald Trump did, but there are so many issues. Climate change is one great example. We have to move with urgency on this issue, and we have to do it in a way, and we have a select committee that has put out an incredible report based on science and economics that paints a picture of how we can meet the goals we need to meet to save our planet and also expand our economy at the same time and become world leaders in renewable energy and in the technologies that are going to get us where we need to be by 2050. So we are more than just anti-Trump. We are pro a vision that is reflected in this platform of where this country needs to go, how we can reestablish ourselves as global leaders, as sort of that beacon of light for democracies and emerging democracies. And that is the work that we laid out in the platform. And it's discouraging to me that there isn't a counter platform. I wish that our disagreements were about particular details on policies and different approaches and timing, because we can work with that. But it's just, we are about Donald Trump, and we will take our marching orders.
Now you say that the platform is more progressive than ever, and you're talking about issues. There is some disagreement within Democrats about some issues. You have the more progressive wing of the party and the more so-called establishment wing of the party. And we saw those divisions reveal themselves in the 2016 election that resulted in some depression in the enthusiasm. How do you work to get people who supported Bernie Sanders, who would like to see more progressive ideas coming from Joe Biden. How do you energize them and convince them to support him?
Yeah, well, I think that you're seeing a very different story with Democrats than 2016, and that we are unified. Do we agree on everything? Absolutely not, but that is not something that we're afraid of. That is in the Democratic family. We welcome that. That is what, we need, that push and pull to make sure that we are always making progress, that we are always meeting the urgency of the moment, but that we work with that to come to a better process and progress. And that is what you're not seeing right now on the other side. It's just we move in lockstep, or you're not invited to be part of this party. And so I see that as a strength, and part of my job in leadership in the House is making sure that we're harnessing that we take the input, that we set an agenda together, and then we move forward unified. And you really have seen that from the House, and it gets sometimes lost in the daily outrage that the White House presents us. But we have over 400 pieces of legislation that we have passed. 3/4 of them we've passed in a bipartisan way through the House, that just met with absolute resistance in the Senate. So we are anxious to put that agenda forward, to talk about ways that we move forward. And it's always going to be a favorite story, like Democrats in disarray, but this is not the Tea Party of the Republicans saw a decade ago. This is about understanding and meeting the moment. And I think that Democrats have always done a good job of inviting those ideas in and making a better product because of them.
We have a lot more questions from our audience members. One is, what most concerns you about the upcoming election?
That the president will cheat. That the president is, I just worry at the lengths that he will go and that people will go. And we have to be ready. And the best way we can do it is to have an overwhelming vote. And it might not be apparent on election night. And so we are looking at all sorts of contingency plans if the president doesn't accept the vote. But there's going to be so much misinformation as the president sees the American people pulling away from him. And he is not about them. He's never been on their side, and I don't think he's capable of doing the work for the American people. It is about him retaining power. And so that's what worries me, is what lengths will he go, and where are the people on the other side that will say that is too far. And you mentioned earlier that we're sort of seeing this call to arms coming from the president, even yesterday from a Louisiana congressman. That is very concerning to me, that we are looking at this violence, condoning it, using it as, instead of a reason to say we have to come together and settle our differences nonviolently, he is continuing to agitate and promote violence as a way to settle, what should be policy disputes. So that is my greatest concern as we go into this.
Also, on the issue of the election in recent weeks, we have seen a focus on the U.S. Postal Service and efforts, actions that were taken there that has slowed the mail. What can Congress do beyond calling the Postmaster General to testify in order to protect the security of mail-in ballots? We just saw this week in Massachusetts, over 1 million people voted by mail. It's going to be a big issue going into November, where a lot of people will do that as well. What comes next? Might we see subpoenas or other actions to force the U.S. Postal Service to deliver mail quickly?
Yeah, I mean, we have a real threat here, and the president has been completely transparent about what he's doing. He has told us that he does not want, quote, those ridiculous ballots delivered. He's told us, and we have taken both actions demanding the resignation of Postmaster General DeJoy, and calling out and asking for information about why are they taking out. In Massachusetts, we've lost at least a dozen of these mail sorting machines that can sort 120,000 pieces of mail per shift. The only reason to take those out is because you don't want mail delivered. That combined with the overtime cuts and other ways that they are delaying the mail. Not only is it a threat to our vote, which is so critical, but I'm getting calls from veterans in my hometown of Melrose who said their prescriptions have been delayed a week. That is a week they cannot wait. And that is how most of our veterans get their prescription medications is through the mail. And so all of this, we will continue to push on every front. We flew back 2 Saturdays ago to vote to make sure that the mail was returned to full operations as of January 1st, 2020. We passed it. We passed it with 26 Republicans joining us because they're hearing it from their constituents as well. And once again, it has just been met with nothing. The Postmaster General, because of public pressure, said he wouldn't continue these actions until after the election, but he said nothing about rolling back all the damage he's already done. So we are going to continue to push. I think the good news here in Massachusetts, and I want people to have confidence about this, is that the mail-in program was robust, was used by 1 million people, and went well. And so that is the good news for us. And I do think that people have to have confidence that that system will get their ballots in. But again, we got to make those plans and vote early.
I want to get in a few more audience questions in the few minutes we have left. One question that was submitted by multiple people is, would you debate Caroline Calaruso? A direct comparison of your positions on key issues would be helpful.
Yes, and we are planning to do a forum we hope to get set up.
Okay. Another question is, what efforts do the Democrats and Republicans have, well, I'm sure you can speak to the Democrats, in saving seats or flipping seats in the House and Senate? And I will ask you, do you think that it's possible for the Democrats to flip the Senate in November?
I do. And I think that we are seeing, races that are moving in the Democrats' way. I think people understand that there is a huge disconnect in our US Senate between meeting the needs of American families and communities and the Senate's take on things that they have just not passed critical legislation, much of which, this is not, Mitch McConnell likes to say this is all Democratic wish list. What is a Democratic wish list about feeding hungry children, about helping our schools open safely, about supporting our small businesses and people who have lost these businesses that have sometimes been in their families for generations? What is sort of a Democratic wish list about making sure that we have testing widely available, about making sure that people can access healthcare? This was the primary issue on people's minds going into this pandemic. And then while this pandemic is going on, we still have a president who is in court trying to take away the ACA, trying to take away people's health insurance, trying to undo coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. So we're going to keep going on all these fronts. And I think that the Senate races and places like Arizona, Maine, even North Carolina, even Lindsey Graham is seeing a real contest start to form because people just want their priorities to be the priorities of the US Senate. And so it is going to be close. All of these races are going to be close. But we showed in 2018 that people understand what's at stake. And I think that it is going to end up being a Democratic majority.
This is a question from me. In the hypothetical that Joe Biden wins the presidency and selects Elizabeth Warren to be on his cabinet, might you consider a run for Senate?
Oh, the endless chess game. Well, I would say no, but I also, I thought gave a great argument on why I would never run for Congress. So I can tell you this, I hope that we have those choices because I hope that Joe Biden is in office. I think that personally, Elizabeth Warren would be an amazing member of his cabinet in so many different ways. But my focus right now is making sure that we have scenarios like that are going to come into play in 2021, because I do feel that so much is at stake for our country, for who we're going to be, for how we are going to define ourselves, that it is far beyond who's going to run sort of the parlor game of who would run for what office. It's about what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to answer this point in our history, this call? And one of my absolute heroes is John Lewis. And the last time I heard him speak, he said he was really grieving for where the soul of the country was, but that he also had never had such optimism watching these peaceful protests around the country, and that he felt the winds of change were blowing. So we're going to unfurl our sails. I will tell you that I am running for re-election. I am running to help us expand and keep the majority in the House, to put decency and the public interest back into the White House with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and to say that it is the end of the do-nothing US Senate, that we have to have Democrats in charge so we can pass these solutions and work again to meet the very, very challenging time of loss and grief that the American people are experiencing. We have to rebuild an entire economy, and with that comes a great opportunity to make it one that's more inclusive so that everybody in this country has a fair shot. So that's what I'm going to be working on. I have shared John Lewis's optimism in the American people, in the American voter, that they are going to rise to this occasion, and we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that their vote is counted.
And you anticipated and answered my last question, and I appreciate that for you, was to ask you about John Lewis. I recall when I was a guest host on C-SPAN, seeing you and Congressman Lewis sitting on the floor through cell phones streaming services because the C-SPAN cameras were shut off during your sit-in over gun rights. That was quite a moment of good trouble. And so I thank you for finishing your remarks on that. And I also thank you for joining us for this discussion. We could have gone on for another hour because there's so much going on.
Already an hour, but.
Yes, it went by so fast. And I thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to introduce Lauren Scribby, who is Director of Programs and Government, for final closing remarks.
Great. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks so much, Kim. And thank you to everyone joining us today, but especially to Congresswoman Clark. Whether you live in the 5th Congressional District or not, we are so lucky to have you in Washington, especially during this unprecedented time. So thank you for your continued leadership for working families across the country. And also just wanted to make a quick note for our audience, for those of us who are joining us live or who are joining us after the fact, that a recording of this program will be available on our website next next week. And please do stay tuned for updates from the Institute on future virtual programs like this, but also our upcoming digital exhibit that shares how each of us has a critical role to play in the upcoming elections this fall. And a couple of steps that you can do to stay engaged in the meantime. First is make sure that you are registered to vote. The second, if you haven't done so already, please fill out your census form online at 2020census.gov. Thank you for your continued support and dedication to democracy and civic engagement. And on behalf of the Kennedy Institute, we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.